The air hangs thick with incense, sharp and cloying, like honey laced with ash. You stand at the edge of the Forum, the heart of Rome, where marble columns rise like silent judges under a bruised summer sky. Whispers ripple through the crowd, a low hum, growing sharper, like the scrape of sandals on stone. Then it breaks. A procession snakes into view, chariots gleaming gold under torchlight, draped in silks that shimmer like spilled wine. At its center, a black stone rolls on a cart pulled by white oxen, its surface etched with faint ridges that catch the flame. Guards in polished bronze flank it, their faces masks of forced reverence. The emperor follows, young, his skin oiled and pale, eyes lined in kohl that runs like tears in the heat. He wears a robe of Tyrian purple, heavy with jewels, and his hair curls in elaborate waves beneath a diadem shaped like rays. The crowd parts, but not in awe. Murmurs turn to gasps as he halts before the temple of Vesta, that ancient house of flame where no man treads. From its shadowed door emerges a figure in white, a woman, veiled, her hands steady on the folds of her stola, the Vestal Virgin, Aquilia Severa. She steps forward, not with grace, but with the weight of a vow older than the city itself. The emperor extends a hand, gold rings flashing, and in that touch, the eternal fire flickers. What happens next will echo through the ages, a crack in the foundation of empire. But first, the stone demands its bride. What you're about to hear involves the desecration of sacred vows and the clash of faiths that tore at Rome's soul. These events, drawn from ancient chronicles, carry the sting of scandal and loss. They unsettle, as they did then. If this weighs heavy, pause here. For those who stay, we trace not the thrill of the forbidden, but the machinery of power that turned piety into peril. From the Hook's shadowed Forum, pull back to the sprawl of an empire at its zenith, yet fraying at the edges. This wasn't mere youthful folly in a gilded palace. This was a calculated collision between East and West, where a sun from Syrian sands challenged the hearth of Rome. In the year 218, as legions clashed in the dust of Antioch, a boy of 14 ascended the throne not by birthright alone, but by the cunning of women who wove lies into legend. Rome, that eternal city, stretched from the misty isles of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, its legions a shield against barbarians at the gates. But within, the old god's Jupiter's thunder, Vesta's quiet flame held the social order like threads in a loom. Emperors rose and fell, but the Vestals endured. 6 priestesses sworn to 30 years of chastity, their fire a symbol of unbroken continuity. To break that vow meant burial alive, a slow suffocation in earth, for it invited the gods' wrath on the state itself. Yet here came Elagabalus, born Varius Avitus Bassianus in the provincial heat of Emesa, a city of merchants and mystics in what is now Syria. His family traced blood to the Severan line grandmother Julia Maesa, sister to an empress, aunt to the slain Caracalla. When Caracalla fell to an assassin's blade in a roadside ditch, chaos bloomed. Julia Maesa, sharp-eyed and unyielding, saw opportunity. She whispered to the troops that her grandson was Caracalla's secret son, a tale spun from half-truths and ambition. The legions, weary of the usurper Macrinus, hailed the boy. By spring's end, Macrinus lay dead, and Elagabalus, priest of the sun god Elagabal since childhood, rode into Rome on a tide of acclaim. The name Antoninus, echo of better days, was thrust upon him. Crowds cheered the return of a golden age. But beneath the laurels lurked a deeper design, to crown not just a boy, but a god. This wasn't conquest from afar. This was a machine of faith, oiled by provincial zeal and imperial gold. Elagabalus arrived not as conqueror, but as high priest, his robes embroidered with solar bursts, a black meteorite beetle, house of the divine carted in triumph. Rome's elite, senators in togas stiff with tradition, watched warily. The boy emperor, barely past boyhood, moved through the palaces with a grandmother's shadow at his heels. Julia Maesa, the architect of his rise, pulled strings from sunlit villas, her networks of spies and soldiers ensuring loyalty. Yet even she could not temper the fire she had kindled. Elagabalus sought not to rule Rome, but to remake it in the image of his god. Temples would fall, rites would blend, and the sun would eclipse the old pantheon. Why did it matter? Because in an empire built on ritual, to shift one stone was to risk the avalanche. Echoes linger today in how faiths clash, not with swords alone, but with symbols that bind or break a people. Breathe for a moment. Imagine the Tiber's murmur at dusk, fishermen hauling nets heavy with the day's catch, oblivious to the currents shifting upstream. In Emesa, young Varius had danced before that black stone since he could walk, its cool surface a mystery under desert stars, formed not in malice, but in the forge of expectation. His mother, Julia Maesa, a woman of quiet ferocity, had groomed him for the priesthood, her own ambitions veiled in maternal care. Life in the temple was rhythm. Dawn chanced to greet the sun, offerings of incense and blood, the gods' favor sought in every flicker of flame. But whispers of Rome reached even there, tales of an uncle's murder, of power's vacuum. Julia Maesa arrived like a storm, her voice low and urgent. You are more than priest. You are heir. Coins flowed to the legions, promises to the ambitious. The boy, wide-eyed at 14, donned the purple not as burden, but as vestment. Trauma etched early. The flight from Emesa, arrows whistling past chariots, Macrinus's forces closing like wolves. In that chaos, faith hardened into fervor. The sun god had spared him. Now he would exalt it above all. No unrelated tales of boyish games or Syrian sweets, only the pivot where priesthood met purple, and a teen learned that gods demand tribute in flesh and fealty. 3 years into his reign, the turning point ignited. It was the summer of 220, the air thick with the scent of blooming oleanders in the Palatine gardens. Elagabalus, now 17, had already upended the sacred college, installing Syrian eunuchs as priests, their chants alien to Latin ears. Senators grumbled in shadowed porticos, but the machine hummed, gold to the Praetorians, spectacles to the mob. Then came the decree, a symbolic wedding between Elagabal and Vesta, the virgin goddess of the hearth. To seal it, the emperor would wed her earthly servant. Couriers raced to the Atrium Vestae, that enclave of white marble and eternal vigilance. The Vestals, chosen in girlhood from noble families, lived apart, their days measured in rituals that kept the city's luck alight. Aquilia Severa, perhaps in her mid-20s, had entered service a decade prior, her life a tapestry of silence and sanctity. Daughter of a provincial equestrian, she tended the fire with hands unscarred by labor, her veil a shield against the world's gaze. Before the harm, picture her in the cool dawn, sweeping ashes from the brazier, murmuring prayers to the goddess who embodied Rome's unyielding core. She dreamed, perhaps, of release after 30 years, marriage, children, a quiet villa by the sea. Her laughter, rare but light, echoed in the gardens where herbs grew for sacred rites. Aquilia was no icon, but a woman woven into the city's pulse, her vow a thread in the greater cloth. The confrontation unfolded not in fury, but in ceremony's cold grip. Elagabalus summoned her to the palace, guards at every archway, the air heavy with myrrh from eastern caravans. Julia Maesa watched from a curtained alcove, her fingers tight on a scroll of lineage. It is the god's will, the emperor said, his voice soft, almost boyish, as he paced the mosaic floor depicting solar chariots. Aquilia stood rigid, her stola pooling like milk on stone. The demand, abandon her oath, become his bride, birth children touched by divinity. Refusal meant disgrace not just for her, but for the order, the fire perhaps extinguished in divine spite. She hesitated, eyes on the floor, the weight of centuries pressing. Whispers from fellow Vestals had reached her. The emperor's rites involved dances under moonlight, altars slick with unfamiliar blood. To yield was to profane the unprofanable. Yet the machine offered no true choice: exile, or worse, the living tomb. Her resistance flickered, a quiet plea. The flame endures untouched. But the priests chanted, drums throbbed like a distant heart. Hands guided her forward, the veil lifted, rings exchanged in a hall where senators averted their eyes. What followed lingered in implication, a shadow cast long across the empire. The union, proclaimed sacred, echoed through Rome like a tolling bell. No graphic unveiling the rite itself dissolved into feast and fanfare, but the aftermath rippled. Aquilia vanished into the palace wings, her white robes traded for imperial silks. Whispers spread. The Vestal's sanctuary breached, their chief now consort to a foreign son. Crowds in the Subura muttered of Omen's eagles circling the Capitoline, milk curdling in markets. This wasn't about one woman's fall. It was the system's flex. religion as politics, vows as leverage. Elagabalus elevated the marriage as proof of harmony between gods, minting coins with entwined symbols, sun and hearth. Yet senators penned furious letters, hidden in wax tablets. A parallel whispers today. When leaders twist sacred spaces for power, do the faithful fracture first? The machine ground on, but cracks formed in the marble. Shift now, not to the bride's shadowed chamber, but to the grandmother's solar-lit study, where Julia Maesa tallied ledgers by lamplight. From her vantage, the marriage was no caprice, but calculus. Reports arrived daily, Praetorian grumblings in the camp beyond the walls, merchants in Ostia hoarding grain against unrest. The escalation spread like fever from the Palatine. In the provinces, Syrian priests fanned out, demanding altars to Elagabal in every forum from Gaul to Judea. Temples to Jupiter stood empty, their priests pensioned off with meager coin, incentives flowed, favor to converts, exile to holdouts. Whole collegia of augurs dissolved, their birds released to indifferent skies. Numbers blurred into human-scale villages in Asia Minor, where old gods' shrines became sundials, families whispering of lost harvests as punishment, a breather amid the churn. One evening, in a quiet tavern off the Via Sacra, a veteran legionary nursed watered wine, chuckling over the emperor's latest edict. "He wants us to pray to a rock," the man said, tracing foam on the table. "My grandfather fought Parthians for less." Laughter, brief and bitter, cut the tension. But the witness angle sharpens. A senator's wife, veiled in the stands at the games, watched as Elagabalus paraded Aquilia on a flower-strewn chariot, her face pale as alabaster. The crowd's cheers turned jeers, stones pelted from the upper tiers. Not targeted herself, yet complicit in the gaze the system demanded spectacle, and she saw how it devoured its own. Another moment, brief. In Antioch's markets, a merchant from Emesa sold amulets of the black stone, his stall thriving amid the edicts. "The sun rises on all," he'd say, pocketing sesterces. Irony laced the air, Rome's gold funding its own unraveling. The machinery whirred, reports to Maesa of unrest, her quill scratching names for removal. Escalation wasn't chaos. It was chain, link by link, from temple to throne. Slow now, as the machine strains toward fracture. Winter gripped Rome in 221, frost etching the aqueducts like veins of ice, the Tiber sluggish under gray skies. The climax brewed not in blood, but in the palace's gilded haze, where silk curtains muffled dissent. Elagabalus, eyes hollow from endless rites, divorced Aquilia briefly, politics, Maesa urged, to wed a descendant of Marcus Aurelius, Annia Faustina, binding old blood to new. But the sun god brooked no rivals. Remarriage to Aquilia followed, the ceremony grander, drums echoing off the Palatine slopes. Sensory tide rises, the crush of bodies in the temple precinct, sweat and perfume mingling, the black stone's shadow looming like judgment. Aquilia approached the altar, her steps measured, but her eyes, once steady, now darted to the flames that mocked her broken vow. Elagabalus, robed in solar gold, raised arms for the chant, his voice cracking on foreign syllables. The crowd, a sea of togas and tunics, shifted uneasily. Then the peak, as the priestly knot tied, a gust snuffed a brazier, smoke billowing like a sign, gasps rippled. Was it Vesta's wrath? The emperor laughed it off, but Maesa's face tightened in the throng. Time stretches here, the incense curls thicker. A senator's hand clenches on his stylus. Aquilia's breath catches as the rite demands consummation's vow. No plunge into detail, cut to the echo. Echoes of chants fading into night, the city's lamps winking out one by one. The crack came not in the temple's hush, but in the Praetorian camp 3 months later, spring's thaw mirroring the thaw in loyalties. Elagabalus overreached, adopting his cousin Severus Alexander as heir to placate the guard Maesa's ploy, a boy of 13 as counterweight. But paranoia festered. Whispers of plots, real or sown, led to purges. Favored eunuchs vanished into the Tullianum, senators' villas sealed at dawn. Aquilia, confined to inner chambers, penned no letters we know, but her presence haunted the broken Vestal, a living omen. The breaking point, a feast in March, halls draped in rose petals that choked the air. Elagabalus, flushed with wine, demanded toasts to the sun's brides. Guests shifted, eyes on Alexander across the table. That night, blades whispered in the barracks. The emperor fled to his mother's arms. Julia Maesa, clutching him as guards, burst in. No prolonged agony, the fall swift. Bodies tumbled into the street, heads severed under torchlight. Dragged through the forum where the marriage had paraded, stripped and mocked, then cast into the Tiber's muddy embrace. The system broke, not the victim, but itself. The sun's machine, oiled by ambition, seized on its own gears. In the quiet after, power realigned like stars post-storm. Severus Alexander, 13 and wide-eyed, took the throne under Maesa's iron gaze, her hands now steering a steadier course. The black stone returned to Emesa by cart, under guard, its temples raised in Rome. Aquilia Severa faded into shadow chronicles note her survival, perhaps in quiet exile, her vows fracture unhealed but unpunished in the coup's mercy. The Vestals endured, their fire relit by trembling hands, the order scarred but unbroken for centuries more. Long-term scars lingered, religious edicts reversed, senators reclaiming seats, but the Severan grip loosened, whispers of Eastern influence tainting the line. An ironic twist, the emperor's coins, once stamped with solar unions, melted down for Alexander's mint, their gold funding the very traditions Elagabalus sought to eclipse. Centuries later, in the dim stacks of a Renaissance library, a scholar named Cassius Dio's ghost stirred. No grand dig, but the unearthing of scrolls in a Byzantine vault, their ink faded but fierce. In 1433, scholars in Florence pored over Dio's Roman history, salvaged from monastic cells, his words a venomous portrait of the boy emperor. Tangible as the brittle papyrus under lamplight, these pages proved the marriage's outrage. Dio, a senator who fled the court, scrawling of sacrilege amid the sun's forced bow. Coins surfaced too, from riverbeds and forgotten hoards, array etched with Aquilia's veiled profile beside the Betel, silent witnesses to the union. In 2011, Dutch historian Martijn Ix sifted these fragments in a Leiden archive, his fingers tracing Dio's barbs against numismatic gleam. What emerged? Not unalloyed truth, but a mosaic of bias, where religious revolt masked as personal vice. Ix, poring over inscriptions from Emesa's ruins, altars to the sun god, etched in Aramaic, humanized the machine. Elagabalus, not monster, but misguided visionary, his reforms a bid for unity in a fracturing world. Why does this echo now? In boardrooms where CEOs demand oaths to new creeds, or forums where old symbols clash with fresh icons, the lesson endures. Power's rituals bind until they bind too tight. Aquilia's story teaches resilience in rupture, vows bent, not snapped, in the face of empire's whim. It reveals human nature's core. We craft gods in our image, then shatter them when they demand too much. Transcending the scandal, a universal thread. Resistance blooms not in armies, but in the quiet refusal to let flame die. Return to that forum's edge, incense faded, the black stone long carted away. The procession dissolved into history's dust, but the Vestal's fire still warms tales told in shadowed halls. Aquilia Severa was meant to vanish, her name a footnote in purple ink, but she didn't. She survives in Dio's furious lines, in coins pulled from silt, in the memory of a vow that outlasted thrones. And now she's here with you, because you chose to listen through the smoke. If this tale of fractured faith stirred something in you, drop a comment below. What ancient vow would you break for empire's sake? Hit subscribe for more stories where history's machines grind against the human heart. In the end, the sun sets on all but the embers. They remember.